The first question we have is, what made you want to set the scene in Rockport or like the North Shore?
Well, I'm talking to you from Rockport at the moment. I have had a small second home, vacation home here for a long time, for almost 20 years. And right around the block from where I'm sitting, there was an inn called the Rockport Lodge. And it was there when I moved in, and it looked like all the other lodges and B&Bs around town. But then I found out that it was a women's only lodge. I found out because a friend of mine walked out the front door, and I pulled my car over and said, "What are you doing here?" And she was a chef, and she was cooking there. And she told me the story about how Rockport Lodge had existed since the 20s, I think she said, and it was set up just for women to use. And I was intrigued by that. And over the next several years, I watched it kind of crumble as it lost its purchase and lost funding and was eventually sold. And I peeked through the windows when it was sort of deserted and saw the dining room tables still set up and the china still in the cupboards on the wall. And I was really fascinated. So I thought there had to be a novel there in Rockport Lodge, and that's where it started. And the contract I signed for the book was called Rockport Lodge. In fact, it changed in the writing.
Yeah, it's interesting how you talk about like how you saw it then. But what is the Rockport Lodge like today?
It's a private home. It was sold to a family, and it's sort of a modern. It's been remodeled inside. It still looks very much on the outside the way it did when I first saw it, although in much better shape. And they maintain the sign outside. It still says the Rockport Lodge, and they've even repainted it to keep it current. So it sort of is a reminder of what it had been for a long time in the past. Okay. You can still see it. It's on South Street.
So another question was, how are you able to describe the perspective of like multiple characters without like consistently like focusing on only one?
Well, it is told from one person's perspective. It's told from Addie's perspective. And so the important people in her life are spotlighted. And I think for anybody telling the story of their life, you would probably tell it through the most important people in your life, your family, your best friends, where you work, all of those, the process through which you grow up and learn who you are is really through other people. So the people in the book that you get to know are the people who are the most important to her best friends, the teachers she meets who recognize something in her, that there's more there, and includes people who aren't good to her. You know, it's not just the heroes, it's also the villains in her life that from whom she learns things and she moves forward. So that sort of focused who the other characters were as well, because they were the people who had the biggest impact on her.
Were there any characters or experiences that were specifically inspired by something?
Well, yes, the historical research that I did shaped the book a lot. There was a pottery for girls in a settlement house in the North End. That was the model for the settlement house in the book. In fact, the two Ediths in the book are based on two women named Edith, one of whom was an artist. So there's a lot of, and as I found out about them, I incorporated them into the book. The fact that it was set in the early part of the 20th century, and we run up against the flu epidemic in 1918, also, you know, that informed the way the book was built. So I did a lot of research in Boston, greater Boston area, you know, and at the library, at the Museum of Fine Arts, at Symphony Hall. And I interviewed as many people as I could who knew anything about it. So all of that informed what happened in the book. So sometimes when I learned something, it had to find its way in the book. A lot of stuff did not find its way in the book.
So like you were saying before, so like given that the book was written during, or well, it was placed during like the Spanish flu, during that pandemic, did you think about, like, did you ever get any memories going through the pandemic that we just had? And if so, would you have changed anything in the book?
I don't think I would have changed anything in the book. It was a very different time. I certainly thought about the flu epidemic of the Spanish flu epidemic a lot in the last few years, but it was a very different time and place. For the biggest difference is that people talk about this epidemic, and in those days, people didn't talk about it. First of all, we didn't have global media, much less social media. So what was happening in different parts of the world and in different parts of the country, even, we're not in currency everywhere. So Boston was one of the early epicenters, and of the epidemic. Although it started, I think, in Kansas in a big way. It started in Kansas, in a military base in Kansas, and here also in the military bases. So I feel like here we go again. That we are a small world. Even in the beginning of the 20th century, in 1918. The flu epidemic came to us from Spain, actually, because of the troops that we sent over to help fight in World War I. So it's, in a lot of ways, it's reminiscent, but it's also incredibly different. They didn't really know what caused flu then either. So they were guessing about its transmission, and they guessed right that people should stay home and stay out of crowds, but nobody listened to them. So a lot of people died. A lot of young people died.
I like how you brought in like the historical piece of that into like when you were writing the book, like you kept that in mind. But what was your purpose in writing this story, and how did your purpose evolve or change as you were writing the story?
My purpose in writing novels is to tell stories. I don't have like an agenda to prove. I don't have a topic sentence sort of thing. All of my fiction has tended to center women and women's lives and women's experience, which until really the 20th century was marginalized, and there were not a lot of first-person stories told by women about women. So that's all, and women's friendship is also something that I've featured in all of the books I've written. But that's not the point of the book. The point of the book is to tell a story about a life that's compelling and interesting, that's entertaining, that makes you keep wanting to turn the pages and find out what happens next. So, I don't have an agenda that way, although it does come from my interests in women's lives, in women's friendships, in women's agency, and in the diversity of lives that they live. We live such different lives, all of us, and have always through history.
So speaking of women and Addie, of course, how do you think the roles of women have changed across the time frame of the story, or between the book and now?
Well, you could answer that, couldn't you? It changed in tremendous ways, not everywhere in the world and not evenly even in our country, but girls do go to school, and immigrant parents, unlike in previous generations, for the most part, push their children to go to school, boys and girls. And that was not necessarily the case at the beginning, for a period of time when parents expected at least one of the daughters to stay home and take care of them and take care of the family, and that education for girls was not considered as important. Actually, as the daughter of immigrant parents, I have to tell you that when I went to college, my parents told me they would pay for 1 year of college, but then my brother was going to college, and it was more important for him to get his college education because he would have to support a family. So it didn't work that way. I kept going to college, but that was still, in the minds of new immigrants, that certainly that boys and men needed to be providers, and that education was a pathway towards that. So lots of things have changed. And you're an example of that. I mean, the fact that you're in a school that encourages you to find out who you are, what you can do, what you want to do, and challenges you and expects you to go on and live productive lives, and pretty much expects you to go to college. So that's the big leap.
And out of all the words to describe women, why did you choose girl specifically in the title too?
Because it's about her girlhood. It's about her growing up. It's about coming of age. It's a coming of age story. And it starts in her childhood, and she, and also people of that generation would have called themselves Boston girls until they died, that they were born here. I'm a Boston girl, or I'm a Bronx girl, or I'm a Brooklyn girl. That was a way that people talked about themselves, and still do in some neighborhoods.
So talking about like the emotional connections that you made with the characters, I assume, how did you deal with like letting them go at the end of the book? I was so sad about like Aaron. Oh my gosh.
I'm sorry. About
About one of the characters, Aaron. I was so sad about him. I loved him.
well,
Still love
they
him.
they had a good marriage, they had a long life. It was sad. And I think the memories that she passed on to her granddaughter are a tribute to his memory. So his memory stays alive. That's actually the overarching thing of the book, is that the book is told to her granddaughter, and that Erin is part of that, of her story, is part of the happy part of her story. So yeah.
So speaking about your grandmother, I actually found that out the other day, about how like Addie Baum was 85 years old and speaking to her granddaughter about this story. I have a really good connection with my grandmother, so I was wondering if you kind of took this story in because you have someone who you love like your grandmother.
No. No, I had my grandmother came to the United States after World War II. She didn't speak English, was never her. It was not her first language. It was never her first language. And and on both sides of the family, they were very old school European grandparents, where children are seen and not heard, and there was not that sense of carrying on. And since the book came out, I've gotten a lot of email, mostly from people saying two very different things. One was, it made me go back and ask about my grandparents, or ask my parents to talk more about their grandparents. Some of them talked about how sad they were that they hadn't asked. And other people said, like me, that their family members would not talk to them. It was just, it was either too painful, or it was considered intrusive. We all wish for that kind of she's the grandmother I wish I had, in a way, right? Who was that attached and connected to a grandchild as a young adult.
So why did you frame the story as an interview between a granddaughter and a grandmother instead of like a mother, a child sort of thing?
Actually, the framing device came very late in the writing process. And I had resisted the idea of doing that kind of a prologue, because I've written other books with prologues, and it was very late, and it wound up, it was a very late draft that I included that, and it really improved the book enormously. It focused the book. It also made Addie funnier, because she was talking directly to someone she had a relationship with. So when I wrote the last draft, and by then I'd written some kind of a draft of the prologue of who she's talking to and being asked questions, she warmed up. She became more three-dimensional as a result of the fact that I was thinking about her actually telling this story to her granddaughter. And here and there she says, "Oh, don't tell your mother I said that to you." She's sort of like, it's that, again, much wished for a relationship between that skips a generation sometimes, that grandparents and grandchildren sometimes have a tighter, less fraught relationship than you do with your own parents. So that was, that came very late. It was the last draft, actually.
Yeah. So about like parents and then like relationships, like, did you have an inspiration for Addie's parents' characters? And if so, like, who was it?
Addie's parents? It's a conglomerate of people I've known and characters I've read about in books as well. I think they were in some ways not typical, but representative of a certain group of immigrants to the United States. So, and also her Irish girlfriend came on her own, which I learned was very, very common among Irish girls, who would come completely by themselves, and very often from rural settings, and then be expected to know how to work in what was then a modern kitchen. So the stories of all of these immigrants' families are based on research I did about what immigrant families were like, reading books by women who wrote in that period, There's some fiction written by first generation women writers who had brief moments of fame and fortune for a while in the 20s. So they're all conglomerations. There's a little bit of one of my mother's friends named Shirley is kind of like her older sister, but they're little snippets of here and there. So it's not a roman à clé where this person is that and it's pretending to be somebody else, but they're my invention based on everything I've read and everybody I've ever known.
So like my question for you was like, who was your favorite character in the story?
My favorite character. It has to be Addie. Is just it's her book. And I treasure her friends a lot. My women friends are very important to me. So her primary friendships with people outside of her family really resonate. That comes from my life to some extent, although not with these particular people. I don't have a sister, so I never had sisters, so that's not my family. But Addie is Addie's a great one, and Philomena as that character, that friend, also because of that friendship, is one of my faves.
Speaking of Addie, who, like you said, was your favorite, what parts of Addie's traits do you relate to? Maybe as like a young version of yourself or who you are now?
I think one of the themes of the book is mentorship. Actually, it's not front and center, but the teachers, the Ediths at the house, even some of her editors later in the book when she's working in a newspaper recognize in her more than she thinks she can do. And so yeah, does that answer you at all? And that's certainly been my case too. I can tell you the names of the teachers and I can still remember their faces who sort of scooped me out and said, here, I want you to take a poetry writing class in 4th grade, which meant that I never learned how to do fractions, but still, but people like that, and teachers even in middle school and high school for sure, and in college also, a writing professor, the English professor who changed my life, just so those people. I hope everybody has a handful of those, and even some of my girlfriends' mothers when I was in junior high school, I think were important role models and mentors. So, yeah.
So speaking about how like you inspire people, do you think this book will like inspire people in the current generation in high school to like be resilient within themselves, like Addie teaches throughout the book?
Well, I hope so. I hope so. And I was really glad that it is read in high schools a lot, and it was a college read in a couple of colleges in the US as well. So I hope so. I think it's a history lesson, easily taught, easily swallowed. You do learn a lot about the early 20th century in the Boston area, at least, and globally. So, and Addie is sort of, she's not extraordinary in a lot of ways. She's not the first person to do X, Y, or Z. She's not a trailblazer. She's her life story is kind of very ordinary. I mean, she raises daughters. She gets herself through college after they're in school and becomes a social worker, which is a real women's job. And, for a while there, I thought, who's going to want to read a book that's that small bore, maybe she should be an actress. Maybe she should be a star journalist, but the story stayed small. So the dignity of lives lived, and the beauty and the inspiration in sort of daily life among ordinary people those stories are also filled with inspiration and courage and daring and mentors and all of that. So I hope that message comes through as well. Whatever your path is, it may look very quotidian, ordinary, right? And yet it's full of meaning and passion, and it's part of a chain of life. So
thank you. And the book follows a theme of identity and finding your identity. And have you ever had a moment of realization of who you were?
Yeah, I guess so. When I went to my 10th my 10th high school reunion, and someone asked me what I did, I said I was a writer, and I felt like a fraud. I'd published maybe 4 pieces of journalism in very obscure alternative journalism kinds of publications, but I said I was a writer, and so yes, okay, I'm gonna own that identity. So that was I have a vivid memory of that, and feeling like, well, I'm never going to see this guy again, probably, or not for another 20 years, so I can tell him this whether or not it's true. But it was trying it on for the first time, and that's who I am. I'm a writer.
Speaking of writing, can you give us insight into some of your writing habits?
Not terribly. There are people who write every morning from 6 o'clock until 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock. When I'm writing a book, it takes me a long time to get going. I always do a lot of research, and for this book, I did way too much research, and there are whole characters and chapters that never made it into the book. So I do a lot of reading and thinking and collecting stories and ideas, and feeling like I know the period in which it's written, and that I'm being rooted in reality, in the culture and in the time. And then I start writing, and writing is excruciating. It's not fun. And I tend to write in the morning after caffeine and walking the dog, and it's hard at the beginning. It gets easier at the end, when it seems like there's actually something in front of you to work with. The third and fourth drafts are the only ones that are worth anything. The first draft is really garbage, and it's really just a way to convince myself that I have something to say. So then I go back and rewrite it. Writing is rewriting, and I like rewriting. I don't like composing. Is tough. It's very tough. I'm in a writing group with 2 other people who I've been with for decades now, both of whom write fiction and nonfiction, as I do. And it's as much a support group as it is like an editing group, because writing is lonely. And it's really important to have people you trust outside of your family to encourage you and, give you feedback on what you've written, but also, and above all, to encourage you to keep going, because it's very easy to quit. All you want to do is quit. You're just hearing from me. The other people have different experiences. It's totally, nobody is the same as anybody else, although all the writers I know suffer.
Thank you. So knowing that we have a lot of writers here, what advice would you give a young writer?
Oh, it's the same. I think most writers give the same, which is to read a lot, which is challenging in a world full of screens now, I think. And I'm on screens all the time too, and I read on screens, but reading a book in quiet, which is practically countercultural now, and reading from different cultures, from different periods of time, in translation, from different parts of the world, all of that makes you a better writer. And that includes nonfiction and poetry. And one of the things that inspires me a lot is going to the theater and dance. So all of that stuff feeds my creativity. But the more you read, the more points of view you have rattling around in your head, I think the better writer you're going to be.
So knowing that, what was your process of like naming the characters and the character developments?
Names are hard. I had Addie early on, but a lot of those names changed over and over and over again in all of these books, in all my novels. It's got to sound right and feel right in your mouth. It's a very intuitive process, right? Coming up with names, and they change, and then eventually they sort of settle into who they are, and they don't change later in the book. That's an early part of writing. What else do you want to know? What else did you? That was the name section of that question.
The character development.
Character development. That's all rewriting for me. I'll write a scene and have a conversation, and everybody sounds the same at the beginning. Everyone talks the same. Everyone's using the same words. And when I go back later, I can see that they sound too much the same. So in the process of rewriting, I find out how they talk, how they react to things. Yeah, so it's kind of organic. It's not like there are people who plot them out. This is my process, but they develop I sort of discover who they are as I rewrite them, and as they interact with each other.
This book and many of your others have Judaic themes. How does your faith influence your work?
Well, it's, Judaism is a culture and a people as well as a faith. So it's really not about the religion. It's about the culture. The Addie's family is Jewish, and it's something that her father in particular is, makes him feel separate and set apart. And, in the North End, where the book is set in the beginning, you had Irish, Italian, and Jews all at the same time for a short period of time. It's always been a neighborhood where people have sort of come through and then moved on. But for a while there, it was also all three of those. And one thing that doesn't show up in the book is the amount of the tension between the three groups, which really got expressed more by boys beating each other up on the street on the way to school and back, and girls didn't do that. But so they were very separate communities, and where they started to meet each other in a way, I know this is a little bit off the topic, was in school and also at the settlement house, especially at this settlement house where the Ediths insisted on mixing groups, and then later at Rockport Lodge, which was unique in mixing groups. So I think you have to remember that people's religious and ethnic identities were, when they came to the United States, that's who they were. They weren't Americans. So figuring out how you fit in was a process of figuring out what you came with and how that interacts with the larger culture. And the religion is part of that. Actually, the religious stories in the book follow the development of American Jews in Boston, right? So you've got these little tiny storefront synagogues in the North End, and then you see the development of the building of Temple Israel, which was the first great big synagogue in Boston, and how the family changes the way it identifies and participates in Jewish life and culture and religion through the book. So I find that interesting. And in the other books, to some extent, it's setting. I don't think The Red Tent is a Jewish book, by the way. I know a lot of people do. It's before Sinai. It's before there were Jews. It's the sort of the ancient ancestors, the fictional ancestors of the Jewish people, and then thus of Christianity. So we all identify them as somehow religious characters. But for me, I sort of, these were people who worshiped many gods. These were not Jews. This was not the Jewish people yet. So, but it's read that way, especially by Jews. And then the other book that's set up around here, which is The Last Days of Dogtown, is the absolutely only book that has no Jews in it in anything I've written. I've written a lot of nonfiction as well. And so that was set in the mid 1700s among the very poor community at the center of Cape Ann. So it comes and goes, and yet there's a great long scene in there about a sort of hell and brimstone sermon by a minister up here. So religion is part of life, and although less and less so, but so that's why it figures into these stories. And they're the stories I stumble across, they're stories I don't necessarily go looking for them. Rockport Lodge, the building, is why you have this book in front of you, right? I took a trip to Israel when my daughter was in high school in a program, and we heard a story about an escape in 1945. And it was such a great story that I wanted, and I wasn't looking for one, but it sort of tapped me on the shoulder. So that's how I find these books. That's how they come to me. It looks more intentional than it is, I think.
Thank you. So knowing that the Boston Girl was set during the early 1900s, how do you think it would be set if you wrote it, or if it was taken like in the present time?
Well, there's a lot of great immigrant fiction being written. mostly, there's tons of it. There's by South Asian, Indian writers in particular, by people from Africa, by people from South America, Latin America, have written amazing first generation immigrant books, and set in Boston, set in New York, set in the South, set in California, set in Texas, and also from Asia, from Vietnam, from China, from Japan. So all of these stories are about, I think they have a lot in common, actually, even with this book, in terms of the conflict between the generations, that the parents are anxious about the Americanization of their children, and then for people who've moved over themselves, their stories unspool in a very unique way. So those stories are being written a lot right now, and they're great windows into how America is changing and growing. And it'll be great in another 100 years to look at those, and they'll be at the beginning of the 21st century, and then maybe we'll have immigrants from someplace else to tell us. But they do, they have echoes of similarity, and then there are differences. There are profound differences as well.
So why did you feel that you needed to write The Boston Girl? Was it drawn from a personal experience in your life?
And it's from the building, I'm telling you. I learned about Rockport Lodge, and it set me on a path, right? And I actually thought I was going to write about the 100-year history of Rockport Lodge. I was going to do kind of year by year or decade by decade, but I sort of fell in love with the 20s, because it was such an interesting period of history. It was for women in particular, taking off corsets and wearing flapper clothes. Everybody makes fun of them, but cutting your hair short and walking around without a corset were radical changes in the way women lived. And more girls went to college, more young women went to college in that period than ever before. And actually it dropped off afterwards, but it was something called the new woman was being created. So I just found that all fascinating. And the older characters in the book, the Ediths and some of the other teachers, came from a world. I mean, they really took off the long skirts. They were the ones who took off their corsets. They were still wearing modest clothes. They were not flappers, but it was a time of huge change. So it resonated with me. And so I stuck there. I was going to write about the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, but I just the book is really focused for the most part on the teens and 20s, when Addie's very young and coming of age. So that's why. Not because I had to do this.
Are there any of the characters that are based off of people in your life?
As I said, just bits of them. Somebody's smile. Addie's older sister is based on, as I said, one of my mother's friends. She's just a big, bossy woman who got things done, and she was loud and brash and very powerful. And so, she's there. Addie's mom is depressed and lost soul. And I think we tend to think of immigrant stories as all happy, clappy, you pull yourself up by the bootstraps, but a lot of people suffered and failed. Some went back actually to the old country because they really couldn't hack it here. And I had read several stories like that, and they're real tragic actually, and not necessarily nice people. So, and I was acquainted with some people like that as well.
Why did you choose to name the characters after quotations?
The chapters.
After what?
Sorry, the chapters after quotations. Is there?
In the book, that was my editor's suggestion, actually, and I liked it. They're short chapters. They're real short chapters, and I actually think it makes it read very quickly in a way, and you sort of look for it after a while when you figure out that's happening. But again, that was I have a wonderful, beloved editor who really helped me write this book, and that was one of his suggestions pretty late in the process.
What led you to come up with the scene in the alley?
Which scene? You mean with the horrible boyfriend? Is that what we're talking about? Well, sexual violence is part of people's lives. And she was very naive, and really naive, right? She really didn't have any experience, and people didn't talk about their experience. They didn't share, they didn't warn each other. So, so she was attacked and she luckily escaped. So that went in there. Yeah, it's not, Addie's story isn't all perfect and it's not all joy and happiness. There's a lot of pain within her family. Her early relationships with men were disasters because she really had no understanding what that could be like until she got older and had lived a while. So yeah, those are hard scenes to write. I find those incredibly hard scenes to write. And there's in the Red Tent, there's a really horrific murder scene, goes on forever. And I wind up writing them very quickly because I know they're coming and I'm not looking forward to it. And so I write them quickly and there's always rewriting, but it's faster somehow because I want to get past it. And then the rewriting, but by the time I'm rewriting it for the third time, it's less, I'm less in the middle of it. I have more distance from it.
Thank you. It's really interesting how you said like how it was like faster and stuff and how that is seen in the book. But what advice would you give to your high school self?
I wouldn't have paid any attention to the advice I gave myself, I'm sure. What advice? I don't know how to answer that question. I know it's a real common question. Actually, I know when you look at them, you're never going to look better than you do today. So don't be hard on yourself about how you look. You look gorgeous. Your skin is perfect. Even if you have acne, your skin, you look gorgeous. There's a line in Day After Night where someone says, looking at a picture, an old picture, saying, all brides are beautiful. Someone says all brides are beautiful, and one of the girls goes, you said, no, once you get older, you see that all brides are beautiful because they're young. There's youth. Youth makes you beautiful. Doesn't matter what you look like. And so as you get older and you stop looking as beautiful, you look back and so yeah. So I wouldn't have paid any attention to that. Nobody pays attention to that. You have to live through it, which is fine. It's painful, but I don't see how you skip it. I mean, maybe someday in the great, wonderful utopian future, we'll be kinder to ourselves as we grow up. And things are in some ways better than they were in the past, when there's somewhat more acceptance of difference, and not everyone has to, there's pushback against, looking like a stick and being really thin and being very white and having blonde hair, and that's what's beautiful. So that's pushed back against, but it's still there. I mean, the beauty culture still causes a lot of pain. That shouldn't be there. Okay, so you're going to do it? So you're going to stop being hard on yourself now that yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Your mother told you that, or you did
Yeah.
that?
So our word of the year is resilience. How do you think you portrayed that through your writing with Addie?
Oh, resilience is my thing. It's I write a lot of, all the books are about resilience. The main characters in particular, she's resilient. And where does that come from? It's curious because her younger sister was, not resilient. Her mother was not resilient. Her older sister was, in a very different way. But people are resilient in different ways, and it's hard to tell who's going to succeed and find their way even through hard times, and who is going to collapse and be forever ruined by it in some way, and just unable to make connections and find joy in their lives. So she is a resilient person, and part of it is because she finds people who say something to her like, very well done, you can do more, I want you to try this, and is giving you a hand. I don't think people are, you can't just, there are people I suppose who are just resilient, but you need people along the way to recognize that you have something to offer, and that you have the ability, you have enough within you to accept it. So those are the characters. There's in Last Days of Dogtown, there's two young boys who were brought up in incredibly difficult circumstances. And one of them manages to have a life and a family and love, and the other one is just destroyed by it and is a bitter human being. So why one and not the other? You know, it's kind of mysterious. Maybe it's about temperament, but yeah, that's why it's so important for people to find mentors and for mentors to reach out to younger people and just offer them a hand up and look at them and say, you're great. You know, you really do that well. You should be proud of that. And that's out of you. And that's sometimes that's the beginning of resilience.
Thank you for sharing your like wisdom with us and all your advice. And we really appreciate your time. Is there anything else you want to share with us?
Thank you.
No, just be kind to yourselves and to each other. That's, you know, the advice of the ages. And read, and don't be afraid to dislike things. You don't have to like everything, but it's good to try things. And I have to hope and assume that your curriculum there is diverse in all the ways that it can be diverse, and so that you learn to see things from different perspectives, historically, socially, racially, every other way.
Well, thank you so much for like answering our questions. We really appreciate it.
Well, it was great fun. Good luck to everybody. Have a great year. You're just starting, right? So, and you're in class. Yay. Okay. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. This
You're
was
welcome.
wonderful, Anita. We really appreciate it. On behalf of the whole school community, thank you so much for spending some time with us. It was an honor for us to choose this book as our all-school read. All 150 of us read it this year.
My honor. It's my honor. I mean, having a book be an all-school read is a real honor. It's happened a couple of times, so I don't take this for granted at all. It's been a long time since anyone chose one of my books, so thank you, thank you, thank you.
You are most welcome. And as our students shared, resilience is our word of the year, is sort of our value. We have a value. And so this was such a wonderful example of resilience, and for all of us, and especially for our students. So thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of your day. On behalf of the whole school community at Penguin Hall, we just want to thank you so very much.
My pleasure. Be well.
Thank you.
Bye.